Hey, hey everybody, welcome to our April 6th Tinderbox Meetup. Mark Bernstein will be showing up a little bit late, probably in about 30 minutes, so we'll be able to connect and interact with him when he does. Until then, we will hold court. So typically the way we run these meetups is we go around the room and new people introduce themselves, or if we haven't seen people in a long time, they can catch us up to date and tell us what they're working on. We will then jump into a theme if we have one, and technically we do have one today, but I didn't confirm with our speaker on the Claude AI integration if he was going to be able to make it. So I'll try to follow back up with him to see if he'll show up. Otherwise, we just jump in and talk about what we've been working on. So, Per Becker, we haven't seen you in a while. So what's going on, and what inspired you to show up today?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for hosting these meetings. And as you just said, I have been uh, doing a lot of other stuff, and I have to admit that I've been trying out other softwares, and
Shame on you. No.
exactly, but they're just not. So I've tried a bunch, and they are just not up to it. So I'm now trying everything that I've done. I'm migrating back to Tinderbox. And then I just saw that there's this potential to talk about. And the reason why I left, or not left, but the reason why I started to experiment with other softwares were that some others were quicker to promise sort of AI capacities. And then many of them they say a lot and they promise a lot, but it's just not working the way that I thought that they said. So I think I was really looking forward. I hope that the speaker shows up because this, I mean, in the Tinderbox forum, I think it's been recently some interesting dialogues, and I think that perhaps it's possible. I mean, I'm not, yeah, possible to do some integration, or some people are managing to do it. So I just want to learn how they do it and see if I can do it too.
Well, there's quite a few, and actually, did you notice in the forum, the Detlef had recently done a really engaging dialogue and full integration with ChatGPT.
That
And
one, yeah. I
have
mean,
you
that
have you
one, that
played?
one I think I missed, but I've seen others who are using it for mapping and then this one, the integration with the Claude, model. So, but I will go back and see if I can see
Yeah,
that left.
I'll try to find it while we're talking. It's hard to type, speak, and search at the
Yeah,
same time.
cool. But
Um,
that, yeah, but that's it for me anyway. So I'm happy to be back.
awesome. And to put us into a little bit more context, is there something you're particularly working on that you're interested in doing? I mean, like what do you want to accomplish? What kind of work are you trying to get done?
Right, but I'm a university professor. So what I'm looking for is to have a really good Zettelkasten, and I had a really good Zettelkasten in Tinderbox, and then I just wanted, because there were so many notes, I just wanted to see if there could have been some more assistance on curating those notes and so on. So it's basically a Zettelkasten that I'm after. And
Hmm.
that's a big project for me. So
So maybe I can comment on that if so when we had a conversation with Dave Rogers about this a week or two ago as well. When I look at Tinderbox, I see that there are basically four kinds of notes. And the Zettelkasten, the atomic note, what I personally in my work call the resource note, is one type of note. And it's the highly curated note that's got its citations, it has its attributions, it's put in your own words, it's been reduced down to an atomic idea, a single idea with a single set of citations and attributions in my own words, so that it's easily repurposable and leverageable and reusable across one's work. That's how I understand in reading the How to Take Smart Notes from Sanke Aaron's book. That's how I got that kind of definition of a Zettel in my head. Is this like, a standalone note that's been highly curated, highly refined, and easily repurposable. Um, and when I hear people talk about, Tinderbox being my Zettelkasten, that's great, but I think it also limits the broader view of what's possible with Tinderbox. And so and I do and I can demonstrate some of this if anybody's interested. But the idea is you have your resource, you have your Zettels, your resource notes, your atomic notes, however you want to call them. These are highly curated notes that you'll reuse. That's one type of note. The other types of notes are your scratch notes, your half thought ideas, the stuff you're just collecting that you've not yet curated. I personally don't do those in Tinderbox because I create hundreds of those every day, and so I use Obsidian for that. And I also use Obsidian because it works across all the different devices. And so I only bring that stuff uh, over in uh, into Tinderbox. Here, Mark Anderson's asking if there's a meeting now. Let me get him the link. Copy. Um, paste. So that kind of scratch notes idea is an important one for me. The other set of notes is what I refer to as backstage notes or the production notes. It's the notes that Tinderbox uses to function itself. So prototypes, templates, function libraries, stamps. Um, I tend to put in that backstage section in Tinderbox what I call a TBX config, a configuration note that I use as the kind of global variable holder. And then finally, the fourth set of notes is what I'll call my project notes. And my project notes are the projects that I'm working on that are my articles, my posts, my books, and I'll be writing in one Tinderbox file multiple articles and multiple books simultaneously because they're all leveraging all of that underlying infrastructure, the backstage notes, the Zettels, and pulling from the scratch notes as I need them. Um, and within that what I'm calling my project notes or my work product or whatever you want to call it, I have kind of two subcategories there. I have the the actual output I'm intending to do. Here is the article that I'm going to publish. And I do all of my publishing work in Tinderbox now because of the affinity I've developed with templates. And then the second element of that kind of my projects work is my thinking notes, much like what Chuck's been recently doing with building diagramming views and things like that. So the curated notes that I use, that I pull things together to help me think and help me visualize what's going on. And invariably those thinking notes may and will often end up in my output in that first category of project notes, just as is, or sometimes they're just simply a reference. But so for me, Tinderbox is so much more than just the Zettelkasten. And I guess that's my point. And
Right.
when you start thinking about the notes in those four categories, and then truly taking a step back and looking at the functionality that Tinderbox gives us, um, it gives us a place to bring in input. We can then use our own manual effort and our own manual thinking to curate that information. But then we can also use the action code to automatically help us curate that information and transform it. So take input, do some processing on it, and then push them output. And my point on the output point thing, and I was just talking to one of the members of my class on the last day of my last cohort I did for teaching Tinderbox on Friday. And I think a lot of people, when they think about output, they'll say, well, I never export anything. I'm not using Tinderbox to share things with people. And my point to them, and Dave Rogers has some really interesting concepts around this as well. The preview function in Tinderbox is just it's another view that you can then create yourself. So you can then, and so you don't actually need to use Tinderbox as a tool for publishing like I do. If you don't want to, you can use the preview function in Tinderbox to create new lists, create new media views, create a whole bunch of, using the templating function of Tinderbox to visualize your data in any way you want. And so I think that's some of the power of Tinderbox that's often lost. I'm going to shut up now because I'm talking too long. Peter, and then
Yeah,
Per Becker, maybe you can respond to that.
I'd say that there might be a fifth category of note, and that's sort of a hybrid between a project note and a backstage note. And what I'm thinking of there is often I use Tinderbox as a dedicated editor for different formatted output types. So I have like a whole layer of LaTeX notes, which aren't really so much Tinderbox project backstage notes as they are a set of notes that allow me to generate structured output for the project, but they're project independent too. So it's sort of like a LaTeX support library kind of a thing. So I'm not quite sure what a good name for that would be, but it's not really a backstage in the project in the Tinderbox because it's project specific, but it's sort of like a project specific backstage
Yeah, I put
that's
that in
shared by
the
multiple projects though, you
yeah.
know?
So for me, Peter, I lump that into the TBX config concept. So those kind of placeholder structure notes. I use that, and one interesting phenomenon I figured out recently was, especially if you do a lot of work in Markdown, one of the things you might want, I found that's really helpful is you pass the text to the text of the TBX config note. Have that text then be because right now there's a function in Tinderbox called exported string. And exported string allows you to export the text of a note as if it was processed. So you're getting all the p tags, all of the HTML tags. But the problem is if you're intermixing traditional export with Markdown, you first need to export the code to another note, process the markdown and all of the, and then you process the Tinderbox attribute values and all of that. And the reason why you need to make that interim step into a TBX config note or similar to like this fifth category note that you're referring to is right now the function exported string can't actually accept a variable. It only can accept a path to a specific hard-coded note. And that's and that's so again that fifth note concept I kind of use in that way. Per Becker, do you have a response to the long comment I made, and then we'll let Mark Anderson respond.
Right. No, I mean, not really. I think there are so many different uses. I mean, I'm using it for other stuff too, to keep you know, an updated list of colleagues working in the particular field that I'm tasked to coordinate and stuff. So I'm using it for other things. I'm not. I think there are probably 10,000 more uses I could use, but I agree with you that it's that these settles or these sort of resource nodes are just one way of doing, I mean, using them. I also take scratch notes, but I've used Think for that, and then import into Tinderbox, and then I curate them and so on. And the powerful thing that I've just realized that Obsidian and Constella and these other apps I've tried can't do is that these I mean, these different views that you can have in Tinderbox. So it can really help you to find connections if you have many nodes and so on. And I think that flexibility in is just not anywhere. In Obsidian, the map view is not any, it's just a nice map. I can't use it for anything. And, you know, so I think, yeah, I think there are a lot of other uses that I don't use it for, but I'm using it for more than just the settles or the resource nodes.
Nice. By the way, Costella, what is that?
That's a new thing. Don't go there.
Can you
It's
spell it though, so we have it?
Constella.app. Speaking
Okay.
about, yeah, so it's like the idea is brilliant, and if you look at the YouTube videos, it looks amazing. And then when you download it, I tried it this autumn and I spent a lot of time on it. And then they promised a new big release and it was out just last week. And it's just not delivering at all on what they are promising. So that's you don't have to go there. If there's not a huge development, but at the moment, it's not worth spending hours and hours on it like I've done.
Okay. By the way,
Constella app. Yeah.
yeah, on another note with that, it looks like Think just launched their 4.0 version of the app that includes their implementation of AI.
Right.
So that's it's in a beta version, so others might want to take a look at that. I haven't played with it yet. Tom Diaz was telling me about that.
Right. It's really interesting because on that forum they have been very negative to AI over the last couple of years. So it's interesting that
Well, the interesting thing about that is Devin Think's been doing AI before anybody called it AI.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah, yeah,
they've been
yeah.
doing it
Yeah,
from day one, right?
right.
Yeah, because they know it's harder to do than actually say.
Yeah. Yeah, they've
So,
done it, but not like large language models, I mean.
correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so that's it for me.
Mr. Anderson,
Yeah,
you
I
got
was just
a
going
lot
to
to
say,
tease apart in this discussion.
no. Just something that sort of as it's swung past me. Because I know a bit of the background of exported string because I think I'm the idiot responsible for it. The actual purpose of it is actually not to do with text. The idea being that you might want something in a note, whether it's this one or another note, in another. It's a sort of way of including part of a note in another note. So you can, although I know, and we've discussed using it in text as a way of sort of post-processing text, and then substituting it for what would otherwise be caret text. Essentially, you say, give me note at this location using this template. Now, the template might just be caret text. It might be, give me the third item in some attribute. My user list. I want the third item of that, and I want it to appear in the following form. That's what exported string is for. It's another Swiss Army knife. If you don't need it, you don't need it. If you do, it's kind of cool, and it does all those weird edge casey sorts of things. I was also just listening to Per just now. I mean, it's a thing for long-term players. I'd say that one of the things I know it wasn't designed as such. I don't think it was necessarily designed intent of the app, but I do see Tinderbox's views very much in a way in the same way as Doug Engelbert's view specs in Augment. So you had your stuff in the program, and you said, I don't want to see it this way, I want to see it that way. And in fact, I like to see it, in those days, you had one, if you were lucky enough to have a screen and not a teleprinter, you had one small screen. Now we have lots of screens and we can actually see things side by side. So I can see my outline, I can see a map, I can see a timeline, I can see all sorts of stuff. And it's really useful. And I mention it here because for people who've not tried it, the tendency is to think that, oh, well, there are two things in the app. There's the map and there's the outline. And that's it. Actually, there are lots. You can have them. You can swap between them. So you can have as many tabs as you like in a document window, and they don't use in the background any power. That they're not running in a sense you might worry about until you click on that tab. And if you've got a really complicated tab, if very occasionally you see the text turn red on the tab, don't worry, that's Tinderbox just saying, I'm thinking. Which leads to another useful tip. If you ever find yourself in a tab and you're thinking, this isn't refreshed, I'm sure I changed something it ought to change. If you click on the tab, it will force refresh the whole view, both panes. And for those who've needed it, it's a good workaround. And the last thing I'd sort of note is it's interesting to hear that comment about Devin Think and AI. I mean, I think the battle going on is between people who are saying, "Shut up and take my money." I need to get my homework done, and I don't care who does it. And the other group saying, "No, there's some really cool stuff here, but who's in charge? Is it a human being aided by very, very clever tools that can pull out things that we can't, but at the same time can't do things that one of these can do? Or is it no? I just need to get to the bar early. Just give me the answer. And I think that's the battle going on. It's very interesting the number of times I see a blog or something where people say, "Hey, this is really cool," and so I says, "Do you use it yourself?" No, of course not. They'll say. So I think that tells us something about where the state of the art is. So thanks, Peter.
Okay, I was wondering, has anybody got good heuristics to judge when an AI is lying to you? I've encountered this a few times now, and I was getting really, really useful help. For the first time, I tried using the Gemma 3 model, and I was working on a programming project, and I was asking it questions about TypeScript, and it was giving me really, really great useful stuff. Then suddenly it starts pointing me to a completely non-existent package, and it had detailed documentation for this totally fictional package, and it took me a while to figure out, wait a minute, something's not right here, And of course, it turns out it just made up that whole block. Up until then, it was going completely accurate, and stylistically, there was nothing to distinguish the true thing from the totally made up thing, except for the fact that the code in the totally made up thing blew up. And I was wondering, do you have any sense of how to realize when it's starting to go off and snow you? And it's so confident in snowing you too. And then I like point out to it, no, you're wrong. That package doesn't exist. And it's like, oh, yes, you're absolutely right. I'm so sorry for that one egregious error on my part. And it just, then it doubled down and suggested something else that was totally made up. Just mind blowing how in 1 minute it's highly accurate, and in the next minute it's utterly useless. And the transition between the two is so smooth, it's very hard to catch.
Yeah, so basically you're referring to hallucinations.
Yeah.
Anybody have any
I
thoughts
know
on
I
that?
can't ask it
Yeah,
anything about, yeah, because I know I
just
can't ask it
quickly,
anything about Mark Bernstein's writing. It always makes up a unbelievable torrent of fake papers and attributes them always to Mark Bernstein if I'm asking it about the hypertext literature. But this was a programming context that seemed to be doing really well, and then it just jumped the rails.
the fundamental problem with AI is that it gets trained and then we expect it to extrapolate beyond its training. But nobody really knows how that works. And so consequently, I don't think there's any feasible way to address the question of whether or not the AI has jumped the rails, as you said. I suspect that's going to remain a problem for quite some time because we really don't have any scientific or engineering sense as to how all those weights and connections within an AI's 2, 3, 4 layers interact, and at what point do they go beyond information that is real and information they create on the fly. We're asking them to create information on the fly. That's what we expect it to do. So at some point, it doesn't have solid resources it can pull from, and it starts giving you answers that it made up.
See, I wish it had.
Gee, and we've got some politicians who seem to be crafted, good craftsmen at that as well these days. So it's a human characteristic, and I suspect someday somebody's going to discover that, we're going to gain some insights into human fallibility by understanding AI fallibility. But
See, I really wish that it could give you some sense of its confidence in the answer it's giving you, because some of the stuff was, rock solid, saved me a lot of time reading documentation, and in the other stuff, it was making up what documentation might look like, and I wish it had some way of flagging you, because otherwise it really kills its utility if I have to assume that everything I'm reading is actually 100% wrong and made up, and then I have to go back to the original documentation and research it myself to see if I was being lied to or not. Then I might as well just have gone with the original documentation to begin with.
Amen.
All right, Mr. Bernstein, welcome. You're on mute.
I'm unmuted.
Can you talk to us about your travels? How's it been going?
Well, the figure skating was fascinating, and then Linda came down with the flu, and so Chicago didn't happen. So, well, and then I came down with the flu, and so Chicago still not happening.
All right, and aren't you on your way, or were you on your way to Australia for a WC3 event?
That's end of this month.
End of this month. Okay. All right. Very good.
And,
All right. Any things you want to contribute to our discussion and agenda today?
Just one thing of historical interest. We've been discussing the command bar and various extensions to the command bar backstage. And it occurred to me that Peter Wasilko and I discussed the question of text-based interfaces for doing things in direct manipulation programs like 30 years ago. And it's actually, we're thinking about is adventure, which was then a fairly new technology, a user interface. And this didn't seem terrifically promising, but Malcolm Davidson had the problem of if I have a complex document with lots of hierarchy in it, and I routinely want to move this note to some place that I know about, but it's not in sight or easily findable from here. How do I want to do that efficiently? And that's quite hard to do in either outline view or map view. In fact, there isn't a view that makes that trivial. It's doable in map view, but it might just be easiest to pop up a command bar and say, move this to /archive/February and not have to worry about where the February archives are. So that's an interesting example of a cockamamie user interface idea that's hung fire for a very long time.
Interesting. Okay. Who has got another response? Looks like Philip, you have your chance to chime in.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just wanted to say that I'm here. Don't want to interrupt the discussion, but I saw that Michael, you wrote to me on the Tinderbox forum, asking when I'm coming.
Yep, there you are.
I was here
Perfect.
the whole time, so
Oh,
I was
sorry,
just
I
waiting.
missed you. I missed you. Sorry, the screen was too small for me.
I don't know how these usually work.
No. So you are here. So can
Yeah.
you let's jump into our theme. Can you talk to us about your Claude integration?
Yeah. So first of all, hi everyone. I've never been to one of these meetings. I am a PhD student from the University in Munich. I'm working on the history of science, specifically the history of UNESCO's environmental programs in the 1970s, 1980s. Yeah, and I've been interested in working with large language models in the last few months, kind of experimentally. And what the most interesting thing that I came up with was this new thing called Model Context Protocol that Anthropic published a few months ago, and that has since taken off quite strongly. And I'm just going to say a few words about what this is, because not everyone has probably heard of it. MCP is a way to connect large language models to outside services. And technically, it consists of servers that can call APIs or run terminal commands. And the client, so for example, the Claude desktop app, can call these servers and therefore has access to tools that interact then with outside apps or services. And this is not just about Claude. So OpenAI recently announced that they are going to integrate MCP into ChatGPT as well. So everything that I'm going to show you will probably be possible just with the normal ChatGPT app if you have a subscription for that. But currently it's limited to desktop apps. So you can't use it with Claude Mobile, for example. You can't use it with just a browser version of it. You have to use the desktop app that you can download from the Anthropic website. And it's also not limited to the paid version. You can try it out with the free one. And yesterday I've uploaded this whole server to GitHub. I don't know if you've seen it in the forum. I'm going to paste a link here as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing to add is that there aren't all that many MCP servers in the note-taking space. So I think there are thousands now, but many aimed at developers. The big exceptions are Notion and Obsidian that already have a lot of these integrations. But many other of these new PKM apps don't really have a good API. So it's actually not that easy to create servers for them. And I initially started with Obsidian because there already were MCP servers for that. And then quickly moved to Tinderbox, which I think has actually a better structure for dealing with these MCP servers, because Tinderbox nodes are kind of have this modular structure. So it's not all part of one text file, but you can manipulate an attribute independently. You can manipulate the name, the text independently. And so there's less room for the language model to make mistakes and mess up the rest of the node. Whereas in Obsidian, to add a link, you have to manipulate the whole text area and can potentially screw up the whole body of the node. Yeah, but just with these words, I think I should share my screen.
And can you define, I don't think I fully understand what an MPC server is. And do you have like a resource or a link you could provide us to so we can learn more about them generally?
Yes. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Yeah.
I think Mark Anderson provided a really good link actually for just the general knowledge, didn't you, Mark? Just in the chat.
Actually, it was Mark Bernstein, but, but yes.
Oh, what's it?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry. I didn't pay attention enough. Sorry, Mark Bernstein.
Yeah, I think that's the main site for the MCP.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, and technically these are all either TypeScript or Python servers that aren't all that complicated to make. So it's maybe 100, 200 lines of codes often. Yeah. But anyway, I think I'm going to show you what this means in practice, and then maybe we can discuss more technical parts later. Because what an MCP server does in practice is provide the Claude app that you can see here with tools. So here you can see that I have 28 tools available. Only a few of these are from that Tinderbox server that I have here. Another one is from Chroma, which is a database app that I'm using for vector embeddings. But that doesn't matter today. Another one is the file system server. That's one of the official Anthropic servers that allows Claude to, for example, write text files, read text files from allowed folders in your file system. Yeah, and I think these are all that I have currently installed. Here you can see what kind of things are possible.
And all these servers are running locally on your machine?
Yes, all these are running locally. I think it's possible for them to run remotely as well.
But the key point being it's your data, not sitting on somebody else's
and it doesn't
servers.
require an internet connection.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
the key
it's
point.
just a local server. This is my own server that's running here. You have to keep this terminal process running for it to receive requests. Yeah. Yeah, but first let me show you one of the things it can do. And I'm going to start with these diagram functions. I've saved a prompt here so that we're not limited by my typing speed. So what this tells the model is, first of all, where it should do something. So that's the parent node, and which document we're using, because it has to know that as well. And then I'm giving it the instruction to create a diagram showing just which tools are available with this MCP server. So I'm just gonna add this here. And I'm also adding a Claude project, which is background information. I can show you later what this does, but it basically gives extra instructions for how to create these diagrams in Tinderbox, because Claude, even though it has decent knowledge of how Tinderbox works, general information about the structure of Tinderbox, it doesn't have good knowledge about specific details, especially about individual attributes and how they work. So you have to give the model extra information about what you want to work with. But let's first see what it comes up with here. So we have to allow each tool use, or you can allow it for the whole chat, but it needs permission every time. And so it first checked this path, this path. Let's first let it run a bit. It first checked if there are any nodes in this tools node, didn't find any, and then started creating these nodes about the individual tools that it has available. And it's given them all the concept prototype that I've defined otherwise. And I've told it that it can give new nodes prototypes by adding the hashtag and the name of the prototype after the name. Anyway, now we have all nodes here, which it's put here on the map. And now it's using another tool called update attribute to move these nodes on the map by manipulating the X position, Y position attributes. And it's already changed the colors of the nodes, which is also something that I had to tell Claude how it works, because it has to use hex code colors to consistently change them, because there are not natural language versions for every color that it wants to use. All right. So it's categorized the nodes in tools that can create new content in Tinderbox, which are the green ones. Then navigation tools, which are the blue ones here. And tools that relate to links, which are the purple ones. And now it's linking these nodes, first of all, kind of in a mind map style, linking everything from this central node. And then it should also make cross links. I'm gonna pull these apart a bit so we can read it. And these nodes also have text content, which is very short, according to my instructions, because I don't want Claude to talk too much. Right, so now the diagram is finished. And this is just to show some of the capabilities that the model has. So it can create nodes, it can link them, it can manipulate Tinderbox attributes if you tell it what these attributes are, what the data types of the attributes are. And it can arrange these nodes in a way that it finds meaningful. So let me also show you the project instructions, which is the extra information that I've given in this Tinderbox project for what it should do in general. And first of all, some principle for nodes in general, that it should make short nodes focused on individual ideas. Then, this is not that important. This is more for my research notes. And this is for the diagram parts, which tells Claude how Tinderbox maps work, basically. And how it can use these X and Y attributes to place nodes in certain places. And then also about the color attribute that I mentioned earlier. So first of all, was this clear for you? I know there's a lot going on.
It's really very cool. And my question though to you is, beyond just the mechanics, what are you looking to accomplish with this? I mean, like, how would someone use this to think better or produce output, or what's the end game here?
Yeah, so I'm also still in the experimental phase with this, but I think the main thing is that it can turn unstructured information or information that is structured in a way that Tinderbox doesn't read natively, like handwritten notes, for example, and can turn these into Tinderbox native structures, making it easier to work with that. Because what I would do earlier is just take annotations from my readings and dump them into Tinderbox, and then I had to arrange it manually and extract, for example, the concepts that are in these annotations. And here I can tell Claude to do some of that busy work for me, so that I have a better basis to then work with. So I think we should consider this like a first draft. And in this case, it's just a simple visualization, but with more complex research node, there would be a lot more to do then afterwards. Or in a way, this looks more like a finished product, but it's just something better as a basis for you to work with, I think.
Mr. Bernstein, you're on mute.
The final mile between your server and Tinderbox, I presume, is AppleScript?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a difficulty? I mean, would it make a difference if we built a MCP API of some sort into Tinderbox?
It doesn't make a big difference because using attributes, you can access basically everything in a Tinderbox document. Yeah, I mentioned this in the forum as well. The only thing that's not as easy is search. So I would like to tell Claude, search for all nodes that contain whatever, UNESCO, for example. And then, for example, link some of these nodes together, or make me suggestions about how these nodes relate to each other. And that's not that easy to do right now. Of course, there are many roundabout ways to do it, or you can just have an agent for it, and then get the children of that agent using this children tool. But
Why
it's
not
not
use, I'm sorry, why not use dot contains or dot find to build a list of notes that contain a word or regular expression?
Yeah, so something like this is also what I've tried and would include in this using just the evaluate command in the Apple script. I think there was some difficulty in how notes are returned using this evaluate command, because it's not a note object that is returned, but just the path as a string, I think, which is formatted differently in different cases. So, for example, when there are quotes in the node name, it returned it differently from when the node names are very simple, and so it made it more difficult to work with in the Apple script. But these are just minor complaints. I don't think you really need to build a separate API for that.
Okay.
On
And
that, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mark.
yeah, we are now painfully aware of the problem of quotes in note names and also semicolons in note names. And it has finally been demonstrated that it's not going, it needs a thoroughgoing fix. We've been doing ad hoc fixes for a couple of years now, but this needs to be cleaned up. And since we cleaned up lists and dictionaries, surely we can clean up quoted strings. So that will be happening.
Nice.
Yeah.
By the way, on that note, Mark, it's very common in a note name to use a backslash as kind of like a quick backhand for an or. You know, it's this or that. And
You mean a
when you,
forward slash, I
or forward
believe.
slash. Oh, sorry, yeah, forward slash. And so when you have a forward slash in a note name, that sometimes can, you know, uh, trip you up as well. So maybe as part of the quoting efforts, we can look at that character too. Philip, did you ever think of using rather than the path, the ID number or ID string as a means of identifying a note uniquely?
Yes, I think that's more difficult to work with in AppleScript, right? Because there's only a find note by path command,
Good point.
and then it's possible to do it, but then you have to use this evaluate command to find the node with that ID, and then you have that problem that I mentioned earlier, that it's not as easy to work with the results. But maybe that would be the request, to have a AppleScript command for finding nodes by ID. That would be simpler in some cases.
Or find gets modified where it returns the path of, rather than giving paths, it returns IDs, something like that.
Yes, but then you have to give the AppleScript the ability to then find the nodes associated with that ID.
I think that's, I'll have to recall back. I thought I saw something like that before, but okay. Peter.
Yeah, did you ever?
Or no, I'm sorry. Per Becker had his hand up first, and then he put it down. You're on mute.
Yeah, it's classic. Okay, so I took it down because I thought this discussion was going somewhere. But I mean, Philip, can you use this to ask Claude to help you to map, or I mean to distribute the nodes according to how they are linked and how they are similar, semantically similar? Could you ask it to, I mean, because this is something that I'm struggling with a bit when you have a very big file and then you make a new connection and it's like across the whole map and you have to start moving manually. And I've tried to sort of use the functionality just force them into a grid and then ask them to what is it called again? The functionality when the links are like springs.
Is that dance?
Yeah, dance. Yeah. Sorry. But so basically, but then if you have thousands of nodes, that's very, it takes a lot of computer force. It seems on my computer it takes too long, and the end result is not ideal. But so some multi-dimensional scaling that could Claude help with that, or what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, in this case, it created just kind of a mind map or simple diagram. If you had more nodes, you should probably tell it to do exactly that. So just group the nodes in different areas based on semantic criteria, or better tell it what these criteria are, what your initial thoughts on that are. I don't think it would work very well with thousands of nodes, because then you get into the limits of what fits into the context of the model. But with Claude, a lot of nodes fit into the context, but at some point, it's not as good as with working with this large context anymore. So,
Right.
or what you can also do is use other tools like a embeddings database that you can also connect with MCP to have more of a formal semantic embeddings database, and then tell Claude to look for the nodes in that database and then arrange them on the map in a way that fits these embeddings, for example.
Right. Thanks.
But it's then you have to have your whole Tinderbox document in that database as well. So using, I don't know, an edict that sends the content of the node to that database.
All right, Peter.
Okay, here's a really radical thought. Did you ever consider giving Claude the Tinderbox source code file and telling it that the Tinderbox projects.tbx file is actually XML, and to work with the XML in that file directly?
No, I mean, you can do that. But I don't have any experience with it. So it would probably understand it well enough. It's again the question of when the context gets full, because then there's a lot of characters that are just used for formatting that XML. But one thing that you can do is do a lot of automating of Tinderbox beyond what I've just shown you, because for example, the rule and the edict are also just attributes that you could change with this. You could also create stamps, or have Claude create stamps for you in that library container. You could have it create agents. I don't know if you need a separate tool for that, or if you can do it just with the create node. But then I also haven't experimented a lot with this kind of automation. Then I think you'd have to give it a lot of information about how action code or agent queries work. So you'd have to have a Claude project which contains like summed up pages of the Tinderbox reference file, for example. Or maybe have Claude go through some of the relevant pages and create its own notes on that, and then save just these notes. But I think there's a lot possible to take away some of the more difficult work of automating Tinderbox.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. Actually, on the last thing on the XML, one thing that might trip it up is that, of course, this is XML. The design is hypertext pre-web, for those that weren't there, which means that the links are in a link base, which is not how the web thinks about things. And things invented since the web, like much of the current AI, might just need a nudge to look in the right place. Because essentially, if it reads a note, it'll see the text. It'll have no sign of any links because they're not written in HTML in the link. There's basically a rich text version and a plain text version. So I won't go down the rabbit hole. It's all documented, but just something that occurred to me in passing. I don't see that as an impediment. It's just more, again, something that if there's interest here, that's something where we might want to do some extras or hinting from people. Another thing was interesting in what Philip was saying is, I found myself thinking, I could see people wanting to use multiple maps. We have this fun about there are many things that notes can be, but some of the things we want them to do prove to be rather difficult. And I don't know where that lies. The point being that a map has a place in the underlying outline because historically that's where it is. It can live in one place in a map. It can have an alias and be somewhere else, but aliases come with some strictures, and I don't see these limitations, but just something that again is really interesting when we see these powerful new techniques coming to the fore. And the other thing was, well, I like myself by saying that I'm as guilty as any of asking for this, but just hearing the conversation before about can we use a find or can we use an ID or something, is that I think it behoves us all to think, okay, which of these sort of seeming limitations actually needs fixing. Otherwise, the poor developer sits at the bottom of an enormous spike of messages saying, this is all wrong and I need this other thing fixed immediately. And it's difficult because there are many ways we can go. For my 2 cents, I think the sense is that once you start to work beyond essentially using it like it's a visible tool before, almost as if you were, moving notes around on a piece of, you're drawing on a piece of paper or moving post-it notes around, that ID, which I know has been found problematic, or ID string, I mean, there are various ways you can cut it, but essentially decoupling the identity of the note, the GUID of the note, from its title is probably useful. But I don't want to get, in saying that, that's not like, I'm putting a marker down in this. I think it's something for the community to think about, so that we helpfully ask for things. If we want things, we helpfully ask for them in a consistent manner, and we don't just unwittingly come at the developer from all angles, asking for a whole host of things that essentially duplicate one another. And if they're all given equal priority, then mean we don't make much progress. So thanks.
Yeah. No, but Mark, I do want to comment on that though. I mean, I would argue, and as you and I have worked on now for years, when I write action code and I go to collect notes, I invariably capture ID, if not ID string, 99% of the time. Because for me, when you're collecting a series of notes, rather than saying, collect children name, if you say collect children ID or collect children ID string, you then have all of the flexibility that Tinderbox offers you throughout the rest of your interaction. So because you can then say, well, then go grab me that note's name, grab me that note's links, go grab me that note's whatever attribute values. And I just find that eminently more flexible.
No, I understand that. I mean, and also having sort of one of the things of spending probably far too much time documenting the enormous and wonderful tool set is Tinderbox, is that there's sort of more than one way you can do it. And if you go back, again, I'm probably as guilty as anyone for $ID appearing, because I moaned like crazy. I think it was something complicated I was trying to do for Ted Granson. One of his amazing projects we did back in version 5 time. The point to bear in mind for us all is that whether it's what we want or we use, is the design intent, the original design. Every choice we make is an opinionated, whether we mean it to be or not, and often that means if we choose one thing, we don't choose something else. So just sort of making such a pivot to say being an ID centric thing, I suspect requires quite a lot of engineering behind the curtain to actually filter that all down to the bottom. Mark is very welcome to tell me I'm talking complete bollocks, but I suspect possibly not. And I'm just being mindful of that, having suggested a lot of things and generally got a polite answer back saying, I think you'll find this a bit more complicated than that. It's just this thing that, yes, it does make sense to me today to decouple essentially the label, the visual, you might say the visual parts of the note as we know it, in a way that it didn't make sense maybe 20 plus years ago. What that implies in the guts of the app, I don't know, and that's my note of caution, which isn't to argue against it, but in a sense, it's that sense that with, you know, it's easy to come to a certainty about a way to do things, which lasts right up to the point and someone more informed turns around and says, I think you'll find it's not like that at all. I guess that's really what I'm reflecting. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, by the way, that reminds me of an article that was written back in 2020 where researchers were identifying the random choices of babies. And so they took babies, you know, 1 or 2 year olds, stuck them in a room and put 2 toys in front of them. And the baby would randomly grab one toy and then forever would never go back to the toy it originally rejected. And they realized that we inherently have this random bias of choice where we think the first thing that we encountered is the best thing, and we tend to never go back to the thing we originally rejected. And I think that happens the same with software and our experiences. When we get exposed to an initial piece of software, we're like, well, that's the way an outliner works, or that's the way a map liner works. And it's very hard for us to unwind that initial rejection of something else.
Can I just add to what Mark said in
Please.
support? Because here I've just asked Claude to get the children of this container. And here you can see in this little code block what it receives back. So it receives the full path of every of these children, as well as the child count, which is the one attribute that I've added up to this point to the script. But the point is, if the path is very long, so if it's nested deep in the outline, this would get very, very long as a result, and would take up quite a lot of the context window of Claude. So it would be much better if we could have a result that is ID as well as the title of this node, and then maybe some attributes. So there's not always the same path for every node again and again.
So can you talk to us a little bit about, like, what does it take to set something up like this? Like, what are the, you know, you've talked about the pieces, but maybe you can go back and summarize for us. Like, you know, here are all the building blocks that one would need to be able to do this.
To set up their own server or to use mine?
Both. Like, what would it take? Like, so if one of us go listen to today's session, like, oh, I want to try that. Like, what would they do?
Then you would try mine first, I guess.
Okay, and what would that entail? Like, what would the steps be for doing that?
Yeah, so it's still a little fiddly and complicated to set up these MCP servers, even for end users, and no matter what the developer of this server does. That's kind of an unfortunate thing. And I think Anthropic wants to improve this in the future. So if that's too much for you, you can also wait, I don't know, maybe a year or so, and then it will become easier. There will be some kind of app store for that. Right now, wait, let me just.
And is an MPC an Anthropic things only, or is there a more general concept? Again,
No, it's an open protocol. It's developed by Anthropic, but it's not limited to Claude, and they don't want to limit the usage of it in any way. So, and as I said in the beginning, this will come to the ChatGPT app as well. And there are lots of independent AI clients that can use any model, even local models, and also support MCP. Yeah, but now this is the GitHub repository that I've uploaded yesterday. And it has some installation instructions. So you'd have to get this repository onto your machine by cloning it or by just downloading it here as a zip file. And then you just put it somewhere. And then you need to use the terminal to run this project, or to build it first. Then it'll install all the dependencies. And then you have to use this, run build. And finally, npm start to start this server, and then you'll be at this point. This is basically what I did here. Start, and then it's just showing me some information that the server is running now. And at that point, the server side is running, and then you still have to configure the Claude desktop app, which is the annoying part. You have to go to the config file of the Claude desktop app and include the information about this specific server in that config file, which is usually empty. So if you don't have another server installed, it's just an empty file, and you just paste this little part in there and replace these paths with the path to your own installation of this. So if you downloaded this repository to your user folder, it would just be users, your name, and then Tinderbox MCP. And then you have to add this build index.js for the first part. And then the second part is the path to the scripts.
And is the index.js basically reading the XML file of the Tinderbox file?
No, because it's
Oh.
using AppleScript.
Oh, God, that's right. Sorry. And then how are you setting up the AppleScript then? Or is it as a user, is there anything we need to do to write that AppleScript, or does your MCP take care of that?
It's coming with pre-installed scripts. So here you can see the folder that is basically this repository, and it's got this AppleScripts folder in it. And this is the path that you need to add as the second part of this config entry, the path to this AppleScripts sub folder. And here you can see these individual script files.
Nice.
That are already configured to receive the input from that from what Claude is sending to it. So it's sending the arguments as like a dictionary. And first we have to pass this dictionary to get the individual parameters. And then it's doing something with Tinderbox in this second part. And you can relatively easily just create your own Apple scripts, put them in here. And then you still have to update this file. Let me show you this is the code for the whole server. No, this one that was the Apple script. This index.ts file. And in the early part of this code, there's a registry of scripts. So these are all the tools that Claude has access to. And if you add your own Apple scripts to that, you have to create a new entry here. So where it says add more script configurations, you just duplicate one of these, add your own parameters. So whatever you want to do, it may need a path parameter, it may need a title parameter, or parameters for attributes. And you give them descriptions, what you want Claude or your model to know about this action or tool. Yeah, and then you still have to restart this whole server if you're changing this code. If you're just updating these existing script files, you don't have to restart the server. But that's all in the GitHub description. And what I can also do in the future is decouple these configurations from the rest of the code so that it's easier for you to add your own script configurations without having to go into this main code for the whole server.
Yeah, Per Becker, please.
I mean, this is, even for me who doesn't know anything about coding, I mean, I can really see that this is really impressive work. I'm just feeling that this is also very daunting for somebody like me. So because you have had to create sub-steps. I just feel when I read the thread on Tinderbox forum, and I think if there's any possibility of Mr. Bernstein and others who are sort of to help with the infrastructure, so to have an MCP server that is sort of tailor-made for this, drawing on all this knowledge that you have developed, Philip, and acknowledging that and everything. I think if we can cut steps, I would be much more, what should I say, confident that a user like me who cannot really code, that I can also benefit, because now you have done this and it's on GitHub. I can play around with it, but I just feel that under the hood, I will not, it's very complex, and complex is not, it's not necessarily the best setup for stability and long-term use. So I saw that Mr. Bernstein was sort of offering that perhaps there could be energy put into to creating a much more sort of built-in integration with its own MCP server. I think that would be a great step forward, if I may.
I suspect that this is actually not going to be as complicated as it looks now. I would have set this project before it burst upon us in the forum as being somewhere between an MA and a PhD. But it wasn't. It turned out that it's done and it works. And that's incredibly impressive. I think making it work mostly seamlessly is going to be relatively easy. And remember that what I think of as the Michael Becker workflow, based on preview and Michael, what's the name of your all-purpose Swiss Army knife text transformation tool that goes from
Pandoc?
Pandoc, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, your Pandoc-based preview workflow basically took a year to get to a state where pretty much anyone who needs it can plug it in now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
with
and
the new
I'll have a
tools, it'll
library up
be
in-
even, we'll have a self-installing library present.
I'll have a library in about 2 weeks where people will be able to do it in 2 minutes.
Right. So I think that this is going that this, if it proves to be useful, and it certainly looks like it's going to be useful, will be fairly straightforward to do in the not too distant future. I agree. People don't want to go in and edit JavaScript manifests as end users, but it's easy enough that we can look at it and see how that could be automated.
All right.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yeah, can I respond?
Of course.
Yeah, just maybe just about the difficulty. I agree that it looks pretty complicated. I also don't know how to code. So I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without the help of Claude. And in this case, it's particularly easy for creating this sort of server because on these MCP documentation sites, they have special text files that you can just copy into the context of the model, and then it's well prepared to create one of these servers. So there's good documentation for that. But even just for these practical matters of installing it, you can just copy the whole README of that GitHub site, paste it into your LLM. So if you want to use it, you have access to some kind of AI model. And then ask it, what's the first step? This is the result. What's the second step? And so on.
But by the way, I think that's an amazing thing you mentioned. I saw Mr. Becker respond with with a big smile. I don't know how to code. I think one of the amazing things is that we are learning just to kind of wade in on things like this. But if you don't mind, could you comment on some underlying things you're using, like, because I think for the neophyte, aka the unexposed, it can be a bit scary to start weighing in. Like, for example, what's an npm, and if I install this thing called npm, am I going to be somehow breaking my machine or introducing some kind of threat vector? Like, what are the things that I think that's what stops people a lot of the same times too, is like, I'm afraid of breaking something, or being able to unwind it if I do something wrong. Like, what's your experience on that, and how would you guide people in helping them get started?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question actually. And this node.js is actually the only requirement that this has, and that is the part that lets you run JavaScript outside of your browser, as far as I understand it, and makes all of this possible. And in the forum post announcing this GitHub thing, I added a link to where you can install npm, but that's also something that you could ask any language model because it's a well-known thing. But anyway, what I also wanted to add is that you really don't have to think about all this stuff with the config files, because you can just use the actions that I've provided in here. You don't have to look at this at all, because these are going to work just if you follow these instructions. And then you can give me feedback for what other tools you'd want to have included. And then I may add it or may tell you how to do it more precisely, or because using it just in the way that I've used it in this demo doesn't require you to go into these config files at all. Just this part with the Claude desktop file that can't be taken away.
Yeah, and again, npm, as I understand it, is maybe Mr. Bernstein can define it better for us, but it's a installation scripting language that's been bought by or integrated in with GitHub and other computing systems to make it easier to run and isolate applications or something like that? How would you define it, Mark?
I think that's roughly right.
Okay.
I
Right.
just asked Claude, and I'm putting Claude's answer to your question in the chat. It's actually a sensible answer.
Cool. Yeah, and I think for the neophytes, I think it's helpful to do just with that, right? What does this mean? How do I do it? And someone on the forum put me down this little path lately, which has really been quite interesting. There's an application called Little Snitch, and there's a free version of it too, but Little Snitch is the paid version. And what it lets you do is you install it on your machine and it will notify you every time your machine's going out to an external link. And it will tell you all of the external links that are happening. And you can pause those if you want. I unfortunately have turned it on so it notifies me every time the computer, any application or anything is going on and triggering an outbound link. And it's absolutely frightening to see how many emails, like each email has 10 or 15 external links going out. You're like, oh my God. And some of them are benign, it's like, go allow me to go grab this photo, let me do this. But when you start digging into it, half of them are analytics and personal behavioral monitoring tools and things like that. It's really
Little
frightening.
Snitch will just scare you. Don't
It really,
play
really
with it.
does. Yeah. And again, I did some research. There's some free versions but they're harder to install, but once they're up and running, they're just as good and they're frightening as hell. Yeah. Chuck and then Mr. Anderson.
I was just going to comment that I think what Fred has also pointed out, one of the great insanities is anyone allowing images to automatically load an email, because you can just, it goes back to the very early days of the internet. Just putting in an image that's a single pixel is all it takes to initiate tracking and confirm that you actually opened up the email and read it. So, in addition, JavaScript, at this point, probably 80% or more of the content that we download from the internet just browsing is JavaScript that is running trackers. So it's just a huge burden on everything we're doing. And when you go to a website, you're likely to be generating hundreds of additional connections. And in fact, all the work that's been done recently with the having browsers establish encrypted sessions for DNS all depend upon that feature. They know that you're going to, when you go to one page, you're going to be automatically looking for dozens or hundreds of additional domain names that need to be accessed. And so the only reason these things work is because they can cache all of that, and they can have one session capture all of these domain name lookups in one pass. Otherwise, these things wouldn't work. So it's just amazing how much garbage is just sloshing around in the internet, and how much machinery has been put in place to actually deal with the consequences of all that sloshing around. So just, be aware of it. And if I had one piece of advice to give to anybody, turn off automatic image display in your email. It is abused to an extraordinary extent.
But then
And
how
it's
do
the
you know
source,
what to turn on and off? And you can't really selectively, if you do want to see pictures in your email, you can't really selectively say ignore that pixel.
Every email client gives you the option to at least display images on a particular message that you understand it's, where it came from, and you make some intelligent decisions. And to a certain extent, one of the issues with something like Little Snitch is it just becomes overwhelming very quickly because there's just too much going on.
Yeah.
And if you start trying to monitor every single action going on from your computer, it's mind-boggling. I sit on a network and I can monitor all this stuff, and it's just beyond comprehension. So it's, we have created a very messy world, is my point. And part of what's really frustrating is that users have no idea just how messy it is and how much they're exposed to the abuse of that messiness. Of course, that's one of the things my company works on is flagging that and trying to point out the obvious opportunities for somebody to fix these problems globally and holistically. But of course, there's money to be made. So none of the actors who are in a position to do anything about it want to, because they're already owned, they're regulated, their regulators in effect that are owned by the people who are making money off of this stuff, and they just don't want to change it.
Yeah.
And that's ICANN. ICANN is a captive regulator of the registries and registrars, and does nothing to avoid the enormous abuses of all this stuff. It's just mind-boggling. Sorry, had to get on that soapbox for a minute, but I'm
For
off.
sure. Mr. Anderson.
Right. I'll stay my tinfoil hat away. Two things. One is just thinking about the point about installing all this extra stuff. Is one of the things that I've found as a sort of as a semi-skilled technical person is that you can install Node via Mac ports or Homebrew or something, but it turns out that these are also little walled gardens that don't play so well with one another. And one thing I think we forget at our peril is it's very easy to find that if you are not someone who already understands the implication of this stuff that's happening basically behind the curtain in the terminal, it can be not intentionally, but it can be difficult, because you downloaded all this stuff that somebody else said, just install this, and you did, but it turns out you installed it through methods that put them in different places, and for whatever reason don't want to talk to one another. I don't have a solution for that, but just something to be aware of. And the other point, because I saw ATBRef being mentioned, is that if there's anything that can be done, for instance, I think we're at the point now where we might consider, well, are there bits of hinting we might want to put into some of the articles that might help the sorts of things we've been talking about? So rather than just everything being harvested by some LLM, but actually, if we want to make the information that's in the corpus that is ATBRef more tractable to some of these things, I'm all ears. Of course, it's me writing it, so there's a limited input facility. But I think it's a really interesting question to ask. I mean, I remember moons ago thinking, way back when we were all worried about searching and finding stuff, and looked at, for instance, putting sort of keywords into every article when keywords were still a tenable thing in web pages, and in fact that went nowhere. But I'm always open to these ideas, and if it helps, given that some of the content is also sort of being thought about in terms of things like command bar. So if there are any useful sort of structures or ideas that I can build into the writing of the notes, I'd be really interested to talk to people. The first thing is to know what's worth doing, and when we know what's worth doing, then we can figure out how to resource it. But that, I think the more interesting question to ask is, are there things that might be changed? At the moment, the resource is written for humans, because that's how I figure it's who's really reading it. That may not be so helpful for machines who don't think like humans, which is why I asked a question. So thanks.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're at the top of the session. Before we leave, anybody have any final comments, thoughts for Philipp? First and foremost, Philipp, thank you very much. Yeah, Mr. Becker.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that I want to thank Philipp again. And I mean, this is one of the most promising things that I've found. And this is definitely going to put me back in fully focus on Tinderbox again after this, I don't know what I should call this stuff that I've been doing the last year and a half, just wasting time, I guess, with some other softwares. So I think that if this could be what should I say, worked on, in the sense that you sort of, Philipp, you invited us to come with ideas on other types of functionality. I think if we could have a conversation going, obviously I don't have much to contribute except perhaps with ideas and wishes and so on. But if we could have a conversation going and we can move this forward, so it can actually be used by normal users. I think that would be an amazing addition to the amazing tool that Tinderbox already is. So thanks for that.
Yeah, Philip.
Yeah, just one more thing that came to mind about the ease of use and potentially what Mark Bernstein could do. And that would be a larger project, but have a look at what Devon Think was doing with their version, because I was trying it out yesterday, and in practice, it's doing very similar things to these MCP servers, because it's giving the models that you include or that you add an API key for similar tools for interacting with your Devonthing databases. So it's getting tools like perform search query or something like that, or create a new document. I don't know what they're called exactly, but you can ask the chatbot what the tools are that it has available. And it works in a similar way, that it then has to add these parameters and so on, but not in a complicated way that to set up, because they've included it on the application side. So you just have to add an API key, and then you can use it. And that's something that you could look at for future Tinderbox versions. So to have a chat as a separate, or as a new kind of view, and that chatbot would have access to similar kinds of tools for doing something with your Tinderbox document.
By the way, your comment on an API key makes me want to comment on that. I was doing some work with Google APIs a few weeks back, and because I share a lot of my files publicly, I was struggling with how do I set up my file so I don't accidentally share my API key, which I've done several times by not knowing how to do it. And Chuck and Mark Anderson came up with a really elegant strategy for that. And that if you use run command, you can have run command read the text from a note on your computer, and all that note and all that file, or that file, a text file on your computer, and all that file holds is the API key. So you can actually have in your action code says go get the API key from this text file and then stick it in, and then that way your API keys are never hard coded into your Tinderbox files. So if that's maybe Chuck or Mark, you can explain that better, or like what's the method we use for doing that? I don't remember.
Well, just, quickly, yes, what you outlined should work just fine. Give it a little bit more thought, and it should also be possible to use the keychain to store that as well, and would be automatically opened only if you were logged in on the account. So there's several ways you could deal with something like that.
And I just put that out there because as we're all integrating these APIs and things like that, and we're a sharing community, you want to think about these privacy implications, because you can end up, and it's not just privacy, it's money. Like if you accidentally got your API key out there, you've just opened your credit card up to whomever wants to use that key until you shut it off.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and again, what do you remember what was the run command you gave me, like touch or something like that? I can't remember.
I didn't give it to you, but it touches what you do to initialize a file. Just literally cat it to
cat. That was
session.
Cat.
Yeah.
So you run command cat, and then you can. We'll post something on the forum if somebody's interested.
Yeah, I mean it's very. The part of the problem here is, I think there is enormous fear of the terminal and command line interfaces in general, and it's very understandable. It's a mess. Let's be honest. And it's got all the same character confusions between what the machine interprets and what humans interpret that we sometimes run into with Tinderbox. Except it's just massively confused because everybody's got different ways of doing things. So, POSIX tried to standardize what goes on in Unix, and they wound up standardizing the mess. And we live with this stuff. So it's understandable that people have terminal paranoia because it's awkward and challenging to work with. But on the other hand, it is kind of the reality that there are certain things that you can do far more effectively from a command line than you can ever do with a user interface, as strange as that may seem.
Well,
that's
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just
I was
thinking,
gonna say
oh, I'm sorry, we were talking over you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's kind of the difficulty, is coming to understand where you would use one approach to interface versus another approach to interface, and realizing that some things, if you want to make a bunch of changes all at once, as an example, that's often much easier to do with a command line interface. Just as in Tinderbox, if you want to change a bunch of notes all at once, you might want to write a little bit of code to do that. Because that will be a little bit more efficient than trying to manually do it every single time. And things like quick stamp are meant to deal with some of those problems. But terminal interfaces are unfortunately very much at the base of everything. And I'm afraid that AI is going to bring a lot of these things to the forefront. And the really scary thing is everybody's going to say, I'm afraid of the terminal. I'll get AI to do it for me. At which point, as Mr. Anderson so commonly says, hilarity ensues.
Yeah. Because of what Peter brought up in the very beginning.
What all the cybersecurity folks say, what could possibly go wrong?
Well, because what Peter brought up at the beginning too is it will hallucinate and make mistakes and reconfigure things inappropriately. But I think the important thing that I learned from command line, it was really Roger Alexander's on the call today. He's the one that kind of helped me break that fear and helped me understand the command line is just a method of running an application without its fancy GUI interface. And you effectively write a command like you say, pandoc -s a file name -o a file name, and all that's saying is open the application pandoc, create a standalone file from this file, and then convert it to this new file. So basically use pandoc to convert a markdown file to a Word doc. And as soon as you kind of get over that fear that the flags, that little -F or -S that you put in command line is nothing more than you pressing a button in the UI. The pressing the button in the UI is just like setting a flag in a command line. And as soon as you kind of grok that those two things are, essentially similar operations, it makes the command line a lot less scary. And Mr. Anderson, you popped in for us the SS64 link. You want to tell us what that is?
I've no idea who runs this, and I don't know what SS64 stands for, but it's actually a fairly useful way for those who are struggling to even work out with the manual command on the command line. It basically runs out a lot of the effectively the manuals for the basic tools that are available in the Mac command line. It's probably worth bearing in mind that although the Mac uses sort of Unix bits under the hood, suffice it to say, not everything is available in every flavor of the operating system. So the link I put to is the Mac OS thing. So you may find variations. So when you go off or you ask your favorite AI to go off and ask Stack Overflow what the answer is, be aware that you may sometimes get the wrong answer because it didn't realize that for instance, the Mac doesn't have something. Some of these tools you can install yourself, but again, that comes back to what we're discussing about, do you feel confident and you understand them? I also put a link to a thing called Dash. I don't think it's everybody's need, but if you are using something a lot and you are needing access to the documentation a lot, it's a tool that lets you download libraries for all sorts of things like R and Python and this, that, the other. And for some people anyway, it might be a useful thing. You install it, sits up on the menu bar. I have it and I use it occasionally when I for a while I'm deep into something that I haven't used for sort of 2 years or something and I can't remember I might as well be starting over from fresh. But those are sort of two things. But basically, if you go into the terminal, if you know the name, I mean, if you want to know what cat does, if you type man space cat, that's basically what's there. And in fact, SS64 is essentially showing you the output of man cat without you having to do it through the terminal, which is, for all that it looks odd, it's just computing before we had, WYSIWYG GUIs.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it's a helpful session, everybody. Yeah, I thought this was really fun today. Thank you very much,
Great
Philip.
session.
This was awesome, and I appreciate you joining and for your first time contributing so much. This is absolutely fantastic. Hope to have you back.
Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. See you next week.
Bye. Thanks for listening.